Brian Contos, welcome back to the podcast.
Robby, it's great to be here.
Return guest. How's
Yeah,
life?
man.
How's your podcast
Uh,
going?
it's been going well. It's funny that we started that podcast just sort of as a fun way to, work with customers and let them get their word out. And, you wake up one day and you've got 100 podcasts with people from all over, everything from CISOs to, three-letter agency government folks to founders, red teamers, blue teamers. And it's been really fun. So I've
Right?
been pretty thankful for that.
Yeah, right. And also, last time we had a chat, and you went from Verodin to Mandiant. How's that transition been?
Yeah, no, it's been great. So, a little over 2 years ago,
2 years. Okay,
Mandy
wow.
acquired
Yeah,
Verodin. Yeah, time flies,
time
right?
flies.
So
Yeah.
it happened pre-COVID. Um, so Mandiant acquired us, and a lot's changed since then. So of course, Mandiant and the FireEye brand have now separated, and the FireEye Classic is now sort of mixed in with McAfee and their parent company. And now Mandiant is traditional, what you think of Mandiant. You've got professional services and incident response and things like that, plus all the Verodin stuff. So, and threat intelligence and some other components we've added. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a really interesting process.
And that process today, that's what we're here to talk about. Mergers and acquisitions in the security world.
Yeah, and the whole thing leading up to it, I mean, it's, when you first approached me about this topic, I was like, a lot of it has to do with just picking the right company with the right DNA at the beginning and making sure you've got the right people if you want it to work. Because as you know, but better than anybody, there's thousands and thousands of security companies out there, and there aren't thousands and thousands of great security companies out there. So sometimes you've got to try to make sure it's not just the right product, but all the other pieces of the puzzle come together, and then you can kind of follow that trajectory into M&A if that's what you want to do.
Right. Well, I know I'm 100% sure I have the best person I could possibly find for this podcast. So thank you for coming. For the listeners that haven't gotten the introduction from me the first time, why are you the man for mergers and acquisitions? Tell us about your background in that space.
Well, I don't know if I am the man for mergers and acquisitions, but I'll certainly try my best. I've been in cybersecurity now for about 25 years. I've had a couple IPOs. I've had about 7 acquisitions. And I guess because of that positions me as somebody that definitely knows what not to do. So, I started off with DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, and from there I went on to Bell Labs. I was living in Brazil, and then I left that to help build my first startup, which got acquired by Symantec. It was a company by the name of Riptech, and we can certainly talk about these in more detail as we go through. And then helped build a company called Arcsight, which was one of the first SIMs, and took that public. A company called Imperva, we took that public. McAfee, we sold that to Intel. Solera, we sold it to Blue Coat. Verodin, and we sold that. I'm on the board of a few companies. So I was on the board of Cylance and Jask and Aptome. Written a couple books. So I've been in this space way too long because my LinkedIn profile is far longer than I'd ever want to look at. But it's been a lot of fun, and I've met some really cool people, and I've got to be part of, I think, some great technology and do some great things. So that's really what it's all about.
How do you not of course you're the right man for this podcast. There's nobody better. McAfee, what? Oh, awesome. But hey, for those of us that are, aren't familiar with the security, the business side of security, these are our businesses, right? They are, at the end of the day, they're made to protect us and everything, but they are made to make money, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know, how does that, let's take an angle of starting your own security company.
Yeah.
How does that go? You hire some developers, you have an idea.
And this is the thing I always tell people when they ask me, how do you pick a company? And it sounds super corny. I know. I don't remember where I got it. I probably ripped it off from a movie and I forgot. But when somebody explains a business to you or an idea, we're gonna build this thing or create this service or do this thing. Sometimes it'll just be a story and you're like, okay, that's interesting. I kind of get it. It's okay. I see some value there. But sometimes when they tell it to you, and this is what I got when I got pitched Riptech, it sings you a song. It just fits, and you're like, this is something I can get behind. And you don't say, hey, I want to get behind this because in 2 years I want to flip it and I want to, get it acquired, or I even want to go public. You're like, this could be my forever company, right? I could work here for the rest of my life. This is such a great idea. We can really change things. And, the whole Steve Jobs Apple thing, we can put a dent in the universe. And it's like, it's this visceral feeling. And, beyond that, you want to make sure, it's a solution, whether it's a service or a product or a combination of the two, that it's solid. You want to make sure that the leadership team, it's nice to know that at least some of the executives have been through it with a security company. And it's not just a bunch of people from Bell Labs, for example, that one day decided to go start a brand new company and they have no startup DNA or startup experience, because that can bite you, because it's completely different building a security company than being part of a huge monolithic company. I get calls from people all the time that are from, let's say, Cisco, because everybody knows Cisco. Cisco's a great company. And they've been with Cisco for 20 years. And they say, hey, I want to go work for a startup. I'm like, do you really? I mean, do you know what you're asking? Because if you're going in and you're talking about vacation and paid time off and are you going to help reimburse me for educational expenses and certifications and things, don't do a startup. You know what a startup is? A startup is a horrible work-life balance. It's grinding away 20 hours a day, sleeping in the office. Multiple startups, I've had a sleeping bag and a pillow in the office, literally, just because that's part of it. And by the way, when you look back years later, those are the good times.
Those are the good times, right? Yeah.
That is fun. But you want that. So you want the right product or service. You want the right people. And also you have to look at market timing. You could have an absolutely stellar idea, but if you're 2-3 years too early, those 2 or 3 years are really going to hurt. They're tough. It's really tough as a security startup if you're too early. So there's a little bit of science, there's a little bit of art to choosing that. But that's what you're looking for. And then your investors, whether you're angel investors, Series A, Series B, whatever stage you're at, you want them to have that DNA too. But I can't emphasize enough the importance it is to be part of a team that's kind of been there, done that. So that's kind of the core. That's the very seed, the very beginning. Make sure those pieces are in place.
And then you mentioned like Series A, B, and C. What does that even mean for us that are not in Silicon Valley?
Yeah. And if I drop any terminology too, just call me out on that.
That's my job.
So there's a lot of ways to get funding today. I mean, if you there's WeFunder and there's all these sort of social funding sites, which are great, and I think a lot of organizations can leverage those. More traditionally, sort of the classic model is you and I have this idea. We want to get some money because we don't want to tap into our savings or our retirement or mortgage our home in order to start the company. Some people do that and it works out. Some people do that and it doesn't. More people do that and it doesn't. So you want somebody that wants to invest in you, and that's usually an angel. And that's somebody that comes in and they say, look, for a piece of the company, I'm going to give you, it's usually not a huge amount of money, maybe $100,000 or $500,000. So you can get some laptops and, get some servers and hire a couple engineers and, just get the bare bones stuff. And then that's kind of your proof of concept. That's your stealth mode area. And then as you're becoming more mature, maybe even that time you land a couple customers, probably not a lot, but maybe you land a couple. Then you go for your Series A. And Series A is usually a much more formalized process where you're taking on, potentially millions, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of dollars as investment, although that would be quite a bit. And you're basically saying, okay, for another percentage of our company, at this point, probably a much larger percentage of the company, I'm going to take on this funding. And it's not like they write you a blank check, but what they do is they give you access to that money as you need it. They have a seat in the board, which means you basically, even though you're the founder, you have people that you answer to. And they'll help fund you to get to that next level, because now you can hire 50 people and you can get some, real access to Amazon Cloud and do some cool things and start doing some marketing and things like that. And then, of course, you can go Series A, B, C, D, and infinitum. Hopefully you don't do it too many times, because the more you do, basically it's going to deplete the value of your shares, because you keep on kind of selling off chunks of the company. So it's a balancing act. Some people have done it with no funding. It's pretty rare. Most people take on at least some level of funding. Every company I've done, we've had angel and then a couple series of fundings.
And so you have angel, A, B, C, and the more you go, the less your share is worth, obviously. And then at some point, the goal is to IPO or get acquired. That's kind of like the
Yeah. So another thing I tell people is never, never, never start a company with the idea again that you're going to flip it. And like, what am I going to do? Are we going to flip this in 2 years? So RipTech, for example, took us about 2.5 years before we got acquired by Symantec. After we got acquired from Symantec, I'll just speak to myself. I went and joined this company that was in the back of a building that looked like a dental office. At the time, they were called Wahoo Networks. And then shortly thereafter, we changed our name to Arcsight. There was about 15 employees, no customers. And the reason I joined, two reasons. One, I didn't want to work for Symantec, not because Symantec was a bad company. I wanted to go build another startup. And I had done Bell Labs and I had done DISA, and that felt a little too similar. So I was like, yep. I was vested to cash, which means all your stock got converted to, you could walk away. You didn't have what they call handcuffs, where you had to stay a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
You can always leave. It's just a question of, are you going to
How
leave
much you want to pay for that? Yeah.
Yeah. So I went there and I had just been through what I thought was like the most successful company in the world and things like that. So I was pretty excited, and we started Arcsight. And as people started leaving Symantec over time, I started to say, hey, you should come on over here. And then I kind of had a big group of people that joined me over there, and we did the same thing. And we started building up this company. And we didn't do it because we wanted to flip it. We go, wow, this is a great technology. And Arcsight took 6.5 years before we went public. So 2.5 years for the first one, 6.5 years for the second one. 6.5 years is a pretty long time in Silicon Valley speak. That's a few lifetimes from some people's perspectives. But what was really cool about it is everybody that kind of came over with me, and everybody that was there as well. And I met some people that had become lifelong friends, like Colby Dorotov, who is the founder of Anomaly, Chris Key, who is the founder of Verodin, is now the chief product officer for Mandiant. So everything kind of sticks together. But we had this mentality, and it's be comfortable being uncomfortable. And again, it's another one of those visceral statements, but
It's a good one.
it's a grind. People like to talk about the grind and how hard it is. And that's when I tell folks that have been with a big monolithic company for 20 years, this might not be for you. Maybe it is, I could be wrong. But generally people that are really into process, and we've got 20 people in HR that will handle this for you, and there's 12 different departments that can back you up. It's up to you in a startup. And Robby, did you ever see the movie Zero Dark 30?
I have not. I will now.
Okay.
Please say that.
Check out that. So high level, no spoilers here, but it's it was about the Navy SEALs hunting down and eventually killing Osama bin Laden.
I have seen that. I thought it was a security movie, but I've definitely seen that movie now that you say that. Yes,
okay.
For sure.
Okay.
Yep.
There's a scene in that movie, and I don't know, I think it's in the first maybe 30 minutes of the movie, where they're trying to hunt down the terrorists. They're at the CIA, and they're having some failures. Things are getting by, bombs are going off, people are getting killed. It's awful. And one of the leaders walks in, he kind of slams his binder on the table. He says, there's no one else to do this. You people in this room are the only people that can fix this problem. There's nobody else on the 5th floor. There's no other secret team in some other country. You are it. You are it. If we're going to be successful, it's up to you. And that scares the shit out of a lot of people. I don't know if I can say that, but I will. That scares people to death. And some people, that's like, it empowers them. Like, yes, right? Their claws come out, their teeth. They want to do it. They want to do it. And that's the DNA you need to be successful. Honestly, anything less than that, you'll probably be unsuccessful as a company. Because a startup, there's very little tolerance for slop. You can't have people there that aren't just carrying their weight, but probably the weight of 3 others. You really need that. And if you have that DNA, I think you'll be successful. And I've been brought into companies to do turnarounds, like as a consultant, that they didn't turn out well. And a lot of that was because there wasn't that type of mentality. It was very lackadaisical. It's like, somebody else will do that, or that's not my job, that's somebody else's. In a startup, everything's your job. If you're an engineer, you're also in sales. If you're marketing, you're also feeding back into engineering. Everybody does everything from the CEO down. And that will make you successful. That will drive you.
And along the way, along this journey that everybody's on, right? Sitting on cords and eating pizza if you're lucky, right? Sponsored by the company. How are you as a leader, or like one of the the founding fathers, or you give people a salary, a very low salary, and maybe and hopefully some stock options, right? How do you motivate people to do that sort of thing? What's like normal?
Yeah. Well, certainly, people need to get paid. They need to make a living, and we don't want people to come over and starve. The potential upside from an equity play, which is your stock, getting stock, that's the big lure, right? You can probably get a good base salary and maybe a bonus structure anywhere if you're a talented security person. But what's the upside on the back of that? If you're there for 3 years or 5 years or 6 years, if there is a liquidity event, if you do get acquired, you do get go public, what are the opportunities there? And it's different for different people. Engineers will sometimes get a little bit more stock. Salespeople get a little bit less because they have a commission plan and they get paid a little bit differently. So the way that's broken up and experience and things like that. But that's, people are motivated by that initially. But you know what I've found over time? You can keep on throwing money and stock at people, and that's really a short-term motivator. You don't want to screw people. You definitely want to pay them what they're worth, and you want to make it a lucrative investment of time. I mean, they're putting in, like I said, Arcsight was 6.5 years. That was the longest one I've ever had. But they have to feel like they're important. They have to feel like they're involved. And there needs to be this thing that if I don't show up and do my job, then it doesn't get done, and it hurts the whole organization. And maybe it means we don't get that piece of code written, or we don't win that deal, or we're not at this level in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, or whatever the case might be that you're shooting for. You are that important, and that is what drives people. And another movie, I'll use another movie, the movie Fury with Brad Pitt with the tanks, World War II. If you ever saw that, they're always saying best job I ever had. After they've just been through this huge firefight and it's just been crazy and nasty, that's what it's like. It's almost, and I know it's not like a war, but it's almost like you're going through a war with your coworkers, right? And you grind it through this, and you're able to win this marquee customer, or you're able to get your code certified. You're able to get some really complex operation to actually work. That is a huge feeling, and that's what brings people together. That's what keeps them motivated, and that's what drives folks to, again, be successful. Much more so than, I know you hate your job, but here's another $5,000 a year. That's gonna last maybe a couple months, and then that wears off.
Right. Okay, so you go through the start, you go through these wars, and then somebody comes along, and they don't. It's not like somebody calls, everybody, hey, we want to buy a company. They call one of the starters, or how do you get acquired? How does that process happen? Starts with a phone call or an email, right? Or
yeah, and I think there's an infinite number of ways that can happen. A lot of the times it's relationships that you make through your investors with other senior level people at companies. Sometimes it's an investor. Let's say I'm a VC, a venture capitalist, and I invest in company A, and I also invest in company B. And maybe I think that it really makes sense for company B to acquire company A. So I get the founders of these companies together, and I'll see if something like that makes sense. There's some key marks that you want to hit as an organization. I think most people, when they get a startup, the idea is we'd like to take this public. Much more so than I hear people say we'd like to get acquired, or we'd like a private equity firm to pick us up. And I'll be the first one to tell you, since I've been through both of them, you can make more money going public, and you can make more money being acquired. It just depends on the terms of the exit and things like that. So It's not like one's inherently better than the other. The biggest difference is if you go public, you have a lot more people watching their stock ticker every 5 seconds, and God forbid it drops 5 cents, all hell will break loose. And if it goes up 10 cents, the exact same thing happens, but in the other direction. So those are the biggest changes. And there's usually about a 2-quarter span where people are like glued to the stock ticker. And people that had never had Yahoo stocks or anything like that, now they do, and now they become stock experts. But that's a different story. But once a company gets to about, again, there's no like rule book for this, but about 50 customers, and those 50 customers are across, government and military and private sector, maybe a mix of Fortune 500 or mid-size, some kind of nice mix, right? You don't want all 50 customers to be in healthcare or power and energy. Unless you're a very specific
Unless you're going for that,
verticalized
yeah.
company, then that's a special case. But about 50 customers, plus or minus. You want positive, predictable quarters, which means if you say you're going to do $5 million in sales that quarter, you want to do about 5 million. If you do 2 million, that's not great at all. And if you do 10 million, that's wonderful, but it's also not very good from a predictability perspective. So it means you don't really have your arms around what your organization can do. If you're forecasting 5 and you do 10, probably something's wrong with your forecasting. So about 50 customers, predictable quarters. Revenue wise, I usually tell people about 15 million in revenue, with the majority coming from not just a handful of customers. So if you're doing 15 million in revenue, but 14 million of that is from customer A, that's not great. It's nice, but it's not, it doesn't put you on the track you want. And then bonus is if you're profitable or cash flow positive. And those two terms at this stage kind of mean the same thing, but it really just means I've got more money coming in than I have going out. So if you hit those markers, you're in a prime location where companies start to take interest and like, oh, what do you guys do? So people that you hadn't spoken to before, then you start getting those calls, those emails. You're at RSA, somebody sends you an invite on LinkedIn. They want to get together. They want to go have a drink. It's all very casual. We got acquired at RipTech by Symantec. Again, we had no idea how any of this worked back then. Amit, our CEO and founder, went on a flight on a private jet with the then CEO of Symantec. And by the time the flight landed, we had been acquired. So things like that happen as well. But usually that's the process. You get the founders together, or if it's a large company acquiring a smaller company, sometimes they'll have a mergers and acquisitions team. They'll do their due diligence, which basically means they'll look at your code, they'll talk to your customers. Sometimes you put some of your code in escrow. There's about 1 million variables that can happen there. They want to talk to the executive team. And then they'll start saying, okay, we think you're worth $100 million. And you're like, oh no, I think we're worth $1 billion. And then you kind of start working what the details are. And then once you get acquired, sometimes money is held over in an escrow account to make sure that what you said is actually the truth. It's just a legal issue that says, okay, we're going to give you 80% of what we said now. And then after 1 year, we'll give you the remaining 20%. And that, again, there's a million ways to negotiate those contracts. That's when you get a lot of lawyers involved and bankers and things like that to make sure everything is safe for both parties.
Cool. Very random, but I remember I told you before we started this podcast that I was just at a kickoff, and our CFO said it's like, and it wasn't talking about mnemonic now, but in his previous, he's been CFO everywhere, right? And he said it's more important to me that the forecast is right than us doubling it. And I was like, what? That makes zero sense. But why? Why is that? Just really quick, why is that?
Yeah. So there's this. It's a negative term in sales. It's called sandbagging.
Yeah.
And sort of water flooding, and you put sands in there. So
I'm not familiar with that at all. Yeah.
So if you've got a sale, we'll just say a sales rep, and he says, hey, I think I'm going to do $2 million this quarter. Okay, great. And maybe he had to do 1.5, so he's going to overachieve, so he gets some multipliers, and he's going to have a really nice quarter. But then it comes in, and he does $5 million because he was sandbagging, because he this deal was probably going to come through, but he wasn't going to forecast it because he's not. So that means you don't really have your forecasting system, and you probably need to do some tooling in Salesforce.com. And it has to do with predictability, again, because the board, that's like it's great. We call it a bluebird. Like all of a sudden you just got this opportunity that just kind of fell in your lap. That happens sometimes. But if you're not pretty close to what you predict, it means your predictive models are wrong. And if your predictive models are wrong, it means you're not really understanding how the business is operating. So what else don't you understand?
So it makes you look
Do you not
bad,
understand your competitors? Do you not understand, what customers need? So it opens up a can of worms of questions. That's an important one. That's why
Interesting.
CFOs usually are pulling their hair out a lot, regardless if the salespeople are closing their numbers or not closing their numbers. It's a very stressful role.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'll let that one go now. I understand now. Sandbagging. Okay. Let's say, or you've experienced this many times, right? And I won't pick on FireEye going to STG or whatever. I'll use since I come from IBM, I'll use IBM, right? IBM acquired a company called ISS back in the day. And ISS was like, one of those network. They were an IPS, right? IDS, IPS, good old IPS back in the day. And long story short, and I'm saying this from other people's mouths. I was like a little kid. I was a toddler back then, but like they bought that company and they ripped it apart. And it was like all the partners of ISS, they were not happy, and it just got, swallowed by a big corporate, big blue. Why would a client sort of like continue buying products from that company when they know they're just going to get, swallowed up, or like, what are both companies thinking? Okay, now you just explain what the whoever's getting acquired, what they're thinking, but like the company buying it. Yeah. Why do they think that that's going to be positive, or like what are the mechanisms they have in place to make sure it stays positive?
Yeah, so there's a number of reasons a company wants to acquire another company. One of those reasons is because they think they've got a good solution. They think they can make money off of it, and maybe it plugs well into what they've got. Another reason is they might have a competitive solution, and they want to sort of clear the board, if you will, and they want to get those folks off the competitive landscape. And sometimes it's just easier to buy you than continually competing against you. So that happens as well. So there's a number of reasons companies get bought. And I've been through acquisitions that haven't gone that well, and I've been through acquisitions that have gone really, really well. And most of the time when it goes really, really well, it's because the acquiring company has over-communicated the vision, and they make sure that everybody knows what it is you're trying to do as a larger part of the company. In addition to that, they make people feel important like they did before. So remember before I talked about you can throw more money in stock at people, and that's great. People want more money and they want more stock, and you should do that. You should pay them. But also people need to feel like they're important and they're part of the major cause. When a company buys you and they make you feel like you're part of that larger vision, so your vision was very laser focused on A, but now you've been acquired, and now this company does A, B, and C. Now your vision expands. So they have to be able to tell you and your team, your business unit, these are the things that we're going to focus on now. We've just expanded it. And now we're going to hopefully give you extra resources to do that. And you're going to get to take advantage of this PR agency and this marketing team and more engineers and more of this and more of that. And hopefully that's what it does. And that kind of brings everybody up. Right. And that happens as well. And I'll just use, Verodin and Mandiant as an example. They certainly did that to the point where we have many people that were classical Verodin are now executives for Mandiant. Our solution is core to the platform now that's being launched. So there's a lot of positive things that have come out of that. I've been with some companies where people really don't know what they're doing anymore. And am I part of the larger team or I'm not? And there's not enough communication, and a lot of fear sets in. And a lot of times you're wasting time because they're just waiting for the other foot to drop. They're just saying, okay, are we going to be let go? My boss has been fired. What's going to happen to me? Am I going to get rolled into another team? So there's a lot of anxiety. And that anxiety is usually a function of the executive leadership not communicating and not empowering organizations to do what they need to do. Now, these things should have been thought of before the deal is closed. This isn't, okay, the deal is closed, now let's figure this out. That has to be done ahead of time. Just like your paychecks and what you're going to do with your retirement and how the stock gets paid out. There's all sorts of financial and HR issues that have to be addressed, of course. But what am I going to do as a group? And I can't speak specifically to IBM and ISS. I was around when that happened. I wasn't part of the organization, but ISS was a pretty cutting edge organization. They had some extremely smart people doing some really cool stuff. I think it's fair to say one of the leaders in the whole sort of IDS, IPS space for sure. And they were also doing vulnerability assessments, all sorts of cool stuff, right? And unfortunately, I don't think that got leveraged well. I mean, IBM's a massive company. And maybe some things were dropped. There was some sort of executive problems that happened there. But I tell people, early on in your career is when you should be taking a lot of risks. If you like this whole idea of cybersecurity startups, you can't be super risk adverse. Not if you want to be what I would probably say is successful in the space. Yeah. Now, as you have a mortgage and a family and other things, it becomes a little harder, right? Because you have more to lose.
Now's the fade, yeah.
Yeah, so take those risks early. But I also say complement that with going outside your comfort zone. So if you're an engineer, spend a little while in marketing. Spend a little while in sales or pre-sales, or if you're professional services, get involved a little in BD or something like that. Kind of make yourself a little broader. By picking up all those skills, it makes you so much better in what you do, but it also gives you a lot of job security and stability.
I just had right before this, earlier today, I had a podcast, and the whole point of the podcast was procurement security. And he was talking about there was many times in his career where he was about to sign a contract and then schmack. And like he said, at that moment in time, nobody wants to sign that contract, right? And either procurement or him, because he's like, okay, what's going to happen with this product? Are they going to develop it further? We have to do all this contract negotiation. Like, what do you think is going on in customers' heads? Or like, what would you tell customers? Like, I guess it depends on the company and like what the division was, like you just said, like, but yeah, what would you tell your clients? Like, okay, how would you chill them out? Like, okay, this is going to go fine. We're gonna keep developing the product, right?
Yeah. Well, you definitely need to reach out to them. You need to be proactive and tell them. I mean, I was part of McAfee Labs when McAfee released an endpoint server patch that thought Service.exe that was running on Windows was malware and blocked it and took down tens and tens of thousands of computer systems worldwide.
Oh, shit.
And there was a war room with Dave DeWalt, who was the CEO at the time, and the PR agency and legal and the head of engineering from different groups that were basically in this war room for like a week straight, reaching out, talking to the press, talking to analysts, talking to customers. So to sort of let them know, hey, we've got your back. We're going to fix this. We're going to make this right. Whatever the problem is, whether it's a failed acquisition attempt, and that happens, and that can be for a lot of reasons. We thought there was a fit. We went down the road and it turned out not to be a fit. That happens a lot. There's more conversations that are had with people talking about acquisitions that don't happen than do. They just don't necessarily hit the public eye. So it's having those communications. You can't stop over communicating. And hopefully if you had the right product to begin with that the customers liked and they believed in, and you can, they can talk to the leadership with that company, still a lot of this business is based on personal relationships.
Yeah.
When people buy a product, usually, when a technical person makes the buying decision that, yes, this is what I'd like my boss to write the check for, they usually do it for two reasons. One, how much do they like the sales engineer that they worked with? Like, do I like this person personally, regardless of the product? Do I like this person personally? Yeah. And is the product, one, showing enough value where I can go, okay, this is what we paid for, and two, not being so loud that it's making my job harder. So those are two very kind of, emotional, personal things. And that goes all the way up to CEOs and boards as well. It's that personal relationship. So you have to have that. If you didn't have that before, it's probably going to be hard to get afterwards. And you are going to get a black eye, right? You are going to get some people that are going to drop. They're not going to believe in it no matter what you do. And you're going to get some people that are going to stay no matter what. So you've got this bell curve where you've got 10% and 10%, you're not really going to change anything. It's that middle 80% where you have to focus on. Depending on how large your company is, that could be weeks or months of time that you're spending out in the field working with them. But yeah, you have to do some recovery, and that kind of stuff does happen.
I have a partner in another country, right? And he was telling me like, hey, yeah, their goal is to sell, our goal is to sell the company. And I was kind of like, well, does that even motivate you? Like, if you're a sales guy, and they're going to sell, and the guy I'm talking to, he's in his 50s, he knows the game, he's got a Rolex, nice car, but like, it's not very positive to tell everybody that your goal is to sell, or you have to sell the vision about like, you're going to be an integral part of this company moving forward. I feel like all his colleagues are just like, they're all looking for jobs at this point if the point is to sell. You agree?
Yeah, well, you're putting a seed of doubt in everybody because they're concerned. Because
exactly.
Sell means a lot of things.
Yeah.
It means I could lose my job. My boss could lose their job. They might close down this specific country. There's a million questions that go through your mind. Instead of focusing on the job, you're focusing on that. So I won't say anything against this, but I personally wouldn't do that. I wouldn't sort of say that to the team. First of all, I wouldn't join a company where that was my motivation anyways.
Yeah, right.
But it can be very demotivational. It's just like when a company they say the quickest way to get acquired is to file to go public. Because as you know, once you file, you have to file paperwork to say, hey, we are going to go public. And it's usually about a 6-month term where auditors come in and they lock the doors, and it's a very scary process. But during that time, that's when you a lot of companies will get acquired too. Or they want to acquire you quick enough and you'll go public and then you'll get acquired after that. Arcsight's a great example. Arcsight went public. About a year later, HP bought them, paying a much higher premium than they would have before. But that's things like that happen in the business. But I would never lead with that. And again, like I said before, don't start a company with the notion that you're just going to sell it off. I mean, you might have I'm not saying don't be so naive that you don't think that would ever happen, but that shouldn't be your driver. You should be wanting to build the greatest company ever. Every company I've done, I've wanted to take public, and every company I've done, I've wanted to turn it into, IBM, if you will. And it's different. Some have gone one route, some have gone another route, but at the end of the day, that was never the driver. And I think the people that you work with, you all have to kind of be on the same boat, rowing the same direction with the same motivation. As soon as you drop the idea that we're trying to get this thing acquired, people become fearful. And when they become fearful, they're less productive. And it doesn't make for a very positive working environment. A venture capitalist that I worked with back at Arcsight, and he told me that the thing that he finds makes organizations successful from sort of a leadership perspective today is to help people and enable them to want to do what you need them to do. So to help them want to do what you need them to do. And I can tell you this, that doesn't happen by saying, come on guys, work really hard. We want to try to get this thing acquired in 2 months. That doesn't work. Now that might work as a conversation just amongst the executive team and the board, if that's sort of a strategic decision that's been made. But as an overall company, to communicate that as your message, I don't think it's positive, and I don't think you'll be successful in that model.
Right. M&As moving forward. Is anything going to change, or is this going to be the same thing moving forward?
Yeah,
isn't there less cybersecurity companies going on? Like, isn't there this a lot of consolidation?
What I'm now. There's always these changes I'm seeing in the industry, and usually you can feel it by walking around RSA, when you can physically go to RSA and trade shows like that. By saying, what are the majority of people talking about? Is it threat intelligence? Is it PKI? Is it cloud? And you start seeing these floofs of things. When you start seeing that, there's going to be a lot of aggregation, which is mergers and acquisitions in that space. I'm starting to see now this notion of SaaS, but security with a service. So again, if we think about RipTech, my first company, my first startup was at MSSP. It was all services. Arcsight was all product. I think you're seeing those things being smushed in together, because people are saying, yeah, I want product. I need software, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud or some combination of the two, which is more likely. But I also need some level of expertise behind it, whether it's threat intelligence or incident responders on retainer or some level of expertise that I can leverage.
Give me value. Yeah.
Actually getting value from your products by leveraging experts, because you're not going to be able to hire enough anymore or retain enough anymore to mitigate the risk at the volume that you need to do today to be successful. So what does that mean? I think you're going to start seeing a lot more M&A that are bringing this software with a service model to play. And the reason that's happening is you don't see a lot of startups with that DNA to begin with. But you're saying, hey, I'm going to take this XDR company and smush it in with this threat intelligence company and smush it in with this services company and kind of put something together that I think can deliver. So you're going to start seeing these, maybe even cases of larger companies kind of coming together to provide these services. And we still have too many security companies in this space. We'll have to start seeing some consolidation there as well. There's a lot of Me Too companies where, hey, we're a firewall too, but we go this much faster, or we're an IPS and we have 5% more signatures. Instead of actually doing something different, and different is what we need in this space. I tell people in security, be a pirate, and don't apologize for wanting to go against the grain, and actually, instead of doing something better, do something different. Actually bring something different to the space. How many endpoint security companies are there? How many firewall security companies are there? They're important, but we probably don't need 100 of each, right? But what we do need is something that's more platform aligned with services specific, that sort of gets people that ROI value. And as security starts becoming more strategic, and it's highly strategic today, we have that seat in the boardroom, we have the executive's ear. These things are happening now. You need to be able to sort of communicate like other strategic business units, like sales and finance and operations. And to do that, you have to start showing value from these investments. You have to start measuring that value. And I don't think that's going to be done with the way that we've done it before. There's a great Einstein quote, and I'm going to end up paraphrasing it, but he's basically saying something like, we can't solve today's problems with the same thinking that caused the problems to begin with. And we've been doing that in security forever. I think we need to rethink it. And I think that rethinking is going to cause some of these acquisitions to happen. And I would actually argue that we're going to see even more M&A happening over the next decade than we did in the last 2 decades. And I just think it's a natural evolution and probably maturation of our space.
We're getting mature.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that we were immature. That's the only reason I got a job here is immature market. I'm super glad that I got in. Mr. Contos, thank you so much for...
And have fun. You're supposed to have fun doing this type of thing,
Look
right?
at me. Somebody's paying me to do this. I'm having lots of fun.
Yeah, this is look. Security is a great field to be in. I've had a blast. I've got to see the world multiple times and work with really, really cool people, and I really wouldn't change anything in that regard. But this is and if you love the grind. And you really do. You just don't say you do because you watched a movie about a startup and it looked pretty fun. But if you actually love the grind and doing it, man, there's no better field to be in. This is the best. So.
I'm not a part of a startup in any way, shape, or form, but I am part of the expansion of Mnemonic into the big open world, and I've been in a lot of those wars. I've been mad at my colleagues; they've been really mad at me. But it's like you said earlier, it's the best feeling to win something, and and that client's happy, and they're still happy, and you get to give your colleague a hug and say, "I'll buy you a beer."
Best job I ever had.
Best job I ever had. Mr. Contos, thank you so much for your time. We'll see you next time. You have to come back.
You too, Robby.
All right.
Take care.